So when we think about screen time, we have to realize that not all screen time is junk food, like we've all been told. We're going to talk about that next on the EdTech vlog. Hi, my name is Dr. Matt Harris, and I do a lot of work around digital citizenship and parenting in the digital age. If you go onto my website, mattharrisedd.com, you'll see that I have a number of resources from past presentations, scenarios to do with kids, parenting materials that are very valuable to help understand kind of the nuances of how to parent in, and even teach in this world where screen time and access to technology is really ubiquitous. It's all over the place. I'm also a Common Sense Media ambassador, so I have access to some of the wonderful resources that Common Sense Media, Common Sense Education produces, and I would highly recommend you take a look at that as you're looking for some more depth about these topics. Now, as part of the work that I do with parents and schools, and I go around the world talking about digital citizenship, this is one element that comes up pretty frequently. You know, a school will have done a one-to-one program like BYOD, where every student brings their own device, or maybe even they provide them like Chromebooks or tablets or laptops, and the students then have access to technology roughly 24/7, inside of school, outside of school, on the weekends. A lot of schools will even allow them to take them on vacations and holidays. So this notion of having ubiquitous access to technology really tends to worry parents quite a bit, which is also interesting because they themselves have access to technology 24/7, and maybe they're seeing some of the issues that they're running into personally. But as an administrator, having worked in schools and as a consultant working around the world, this is one of the most frequent questions I get is how much screen time is too much screen time? And it's an interesting question because there is no real clear answer, and it also has an implicit bias in it that we need to talk about. So when you ask the question, how much screen time is too much screen time, you're assuming that it is too much or it's something negative in general. And that's the bias that I want to address and get people away from. There is a quantity issue that I talk about with parents, and there are a lot of factors that determine what the value of the screen time is in terms of time. That needs to be something that is worked out between the school and the parents. And it's age appropriate and it's need appropriate. You know, a very young child in a Western context doesn't need as much screen time. It's just not culturally appropriate. It's not adolescent, or it's not developmentally appropriate. But maybe as they grow older, they need more screen time, or there's other ways that they're communicating with their friends or doing other things. So that number could possibly go up. There are also cultural elements where the use of screens has different meanings and connotations. And in certain cultures, screen time is very much a connecting element between families, and so that's very important. In others, it's a divider. And so it's important not to try and put a one-size-fits-all on screen time. It doesn't work that way. We need to make sure that we take a focus where we're doing this of value for everybody, and that we have a full understanding before we start putting in limits and making suggestions for what to do and what not to do. And that's where we come into this notion of what we call the screen time pyramid. And this is done, this was provided by an excellent educator. And if you look down in the comments, I'll put the link to her blog, her blog and her vlog. She has a number of very strong materials around this topic. So I'm not bringing this in myself. This is hers. And what she has said, and I wholly subscribe to this, is that there's a food pyramid of sorts when it comes to screen time, where not all screen time is that junk food. Now, for those of you that don't remember, you know, many years ago, we used to have the healthy food eating pyramid, right? And the fruits and vegetables were at the bottom, and then we had grains and dairy, and then at the top we had the things that I really wanted to eat, you know, like the sugars and the fried foods. Obviously, we don't want to have too many of those things. We'd rather have the more valuable, nutritious items. It's the same thing with screen time with students. We need to find those things that have more nutritional value and steer them away from having too much of the sugary items. And this is where we get away from that implicit bias about technology or screen time being a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. That's not true. There are positive and negative elements of screen time that have to be accounted for when you think about value. So as you can see here, we have three different levels. And the bottom level is this notion of creating with technology. So that's the most valuable thing. We're not looking to have just a passive intake of information, just looking at YouTube videos, unless they're mine. If you want to look at mine, that's fine. But if you're just looking at YouTube videos or without learning or doing something educational, if you're just consuming, you're not having that interactive experience that makes screen time the most valuable. So building things, making movies, connecting with other people, those are the real valuable things for screen time, and that's what we want to encourage in students. So connecting to a grandparent, doing stop motion animation, doing some drawing, interacting with a site that gives them feedback. Those are the elements of screen time that we find very strongly. Then there are the educational ones that are kind of in that middle tier. So this is kind of the grains and the dairy part, right? And these are the sort of things where you go onto a website and you consume some knowledge, and maybe you're tested, you do some basic activities, but the idea is that you're developing knowledge, skills, competencies, understanding. That's what we're looking for out of this middle tier. And then of course there is the junk food. And kids are going to want to do the junk food, which is consuming media, playing games with very little value. And notice I said very little value because there are a number of games that have amazing value on that first and second level of this food pyramid. And it is important that they get time on these things. It's something that they use to communicate with their friends and build their own identities and build their interests. So we want to make sure that we give them enough time to do these things to have some value. But when we think about screen time overall, we want to think about how do we hit each of those elements with value in a place of moderation. This is all you'll see in some of the other elements here that related to this food pyramid, that there are other things that we need to do besides screen time, and free play and sleeping and other interactions. Those are important. But when you're thinking about the screen time, make sure that you give enough to each of those items, that as you're creating your limits as a family or as a school, that you're considering some free time for the junk food and some really strong creative time for that bottom level, and that kids are really doing things for purpose. And that's the idea here. Screen time as freedom is where we run into problems. Screen time for purpose is where we build really valuable skills. So hey, do me a favor and subscribe to my channel here at the bottom. I'm going to talk about a number of other things related to digital citizenship and educational technology, maybe some parenting items, whatever. Leave some comments, tell me your thoughts, and share some resources. Those are always really valuable for me and for the rest of our viewers. And then talk to me, find me on Twitter. So my handle is @MattHarrisEdD. And I share a lot of materials and have conversations with people around the world. Connect with me. I'd love to have more chats about these sorts of things. And thanks for listening. Have a good day.